Okay, so this morning we're going to be having a plenary discussion on if we speak the same political language, and I'm going to briefly introduce the panel, and then I'm going to hand over to them. So my name's Kat Dyer. I work for Public and Commercial Services Union UK. We've got Bishnu Lamsal from the General Federation of Nepalese Trade Unions, Stephanie Luce from the Murphy Institute for Workers' Education, and Derek Keenan from Strathclyde University. So this morning, I hope what you'll find is a fascinating discussion on if we speak the same political language. And what we're hoping to get from this debate is what unions mean by words such as socialism, feminism, and syndicalism. And for me, this is a really interesting debate as well, because for the past 4 years, I've been working with the Commission and the GLI, and every year we have fascinating debates on terminology used, and we pull this together into a political dictionary. So it'll be really interesting to get some good debate going this morning. And then at the end of the discussion, we're hoping to draw together views and conclusions on how unions are developing politics to the left. So I'm going to hand over to the panel, who give short, maybe 15-20 minute presentations, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So, Bishnu?
Thank you very much. Good morning. Today I am going to talk about socialism. I think I am not the right person to talk about socialism, but I will talk on behalf of the GEFONT, what is our perspective on socialism. Before that, I want to share here one thing. In April 25th, there was a very big killer quake in the Nepal, you saw in the video. And after that quake, all people, millionaire, billionaire, and very rich people and poor people came together in the street, and they eat same tent, they sleep same tent, and they have same fear, and people started to say, oh, this is socialism, all are equal. Then slowly what happened? The rich people, within the 1 month, rich people, they went back to their home, good home, they make good home, and poor people still they are in the tent. So within the 1 month, the socialism of so-called socialism is collapsed. So I am not going to talk about that types of socialism. I am going to talk another types of socialism. And in our perspective, what is the socialism? We have fixed our vision. It was in 10 years back, there was our 4th National Congress. At that period, we fixed our vision. I am going to explain here. First, it is the advanced form of the social system in which the exploitation of the human being by the human being will completely end. This is our one vision. Then class division will be gradually erased. Dialogues and debates will go up to a new improved stage. And research and investigation will progress in the new speed. Love, cooperation, mutual trust and respect will be the main feature of the human society. This is our vision. But the struggle between the truth and false will be continued. It is the never-ending process. Will completely depend on society. Now people are individualistic, and they are not believe in the society. So in our vision, we think human being will be completely dependent on society. Class will be dignified and their lives will be prosperous. The socialism is not only dream, it is our political goal. People say that socialism itself not come into a plate. It is true. It won't be achieved automatically, it needs to make effort continuously. Practices, there are some practices in the world. I don't want to enter in the all practices, because you all are aware, and you all are know what types of practices is going in all over the world. We know various models of socialism have been practiced in the world. There are diversities and there are varieties within the socialism. In Europe there are different kinds of socialism. In Asia there are different. In the America there are different. So I don't want to enter in this issue now, because we don't have time. We have limited time. And what we believe, there are different types of socialism, but our belief is that I am going to explain here. Our final destination is the achievement of free, dignified and prosperous life of the working class and working people. Therefore, socialism should be political goal of the trade union movement. It is our belief. It should be political goal of the trade union movement for all over the world. We believe there are four major elements of the socialism: democracy, equality, freedom, socialization of the significant part of the economy. It is major elements. Without these elements, socialism will be incomplete. This is our belief. No doubt socialism is an equal society, and equality is an end of the unequal relationship, which is income, property, power and opportunity. So we would like to prefer to classify equality in three categories. One is unequal equality, second is absolute equality, third is relative equality. Unequal equality. The political parties advocate for a free market economy. It supports to the unequal equality. We don't believe it. And second thing, in the free market economy, the powerful impose their economic political hegemony on the weak. In such an economy, the rich got richer and the poor turned poorer. We are against it. Absolute equality. The advocates of absolute equality sell heavenly dreams to the people. The slogan of all are equal and all get equality. In my view, this doesn't work. I think it is just unachievable dream. And another is relative equality. Advocates of relative equality opposed to the equal distribution of the poverty. They support the policy of changing the low class people to the high class status. It is relatively better to ensure equality. Now, where are we? Means Nepalese society. Now our society is post-peasant society, which means we have ended up feudal production relation through People's Revolution 2006. You all know, I think you may know, in 2006 there was, before the 2006 there was monarchy system in the Nepal. In 2006 there was a big people's revolution. From that revolution we dismissed the monarchism, then we established republican system in Nepal. After that revolution, our production relation also changed. By it to fix the, after that revolution, we entered the another stage. Previous 2006 we were another stage, and now we entered in the another stage, but yet to fix the capitalist production relation age of 19th and 20th century of the Europe. I would like to say our journey has reached such a crossroad. Now we are in the crossroad. One drag us in a way towards so-called market economy, and another lead us towards the socialist economy. Definitely we prefer to go in the second option. Some efforts of we are in favor of the socialism, and we are not favor in the capitalism. Now we are in constitution making process. There is two constitution assembly election happened in Nepal. It is new things, because in 2005-7 there was a first constituent assembly election, and it was for 4 years. Within the 4 years they failed to make a constitution. Then again there happened the second constituent assembly election, and now they are in the constitution making process, and now we hope they are in the final stage. We hope within the 2 months the constitution will came, new constitution will came in Nepal, and it will new for Nepalese people. This is our hope. We are advocating with parties and CA members to address our issues. We lobbying for socialism should include an objectives in the new constitution of the country. We are lobbying for that, but there is big debate going on in the CA. Where should we go, socialism or neoliberalism? There are big debate going on, and definitely our stand will be for the socialism, not for the neoliberalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishnu. I'm going to take questions at the end, so without further ado, Stephanie, talk to you.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much. It's great to be here for my first time at the Global Labor Institute. I teach labor studies, and I also primarily work with low-wage worker movements and living wage movements, and that has always intersected heavily with feminist work and gender work. So today I'm going to talk about what we mean by feminism. And there are many ways to define feminism, many debates. People talk about first wave, second wave, or different ideologies. So I won't go into all that detail, but I'll talk about some general concepts. And most of the time when we hear feminism used in mainstream or policy circles, it's really about women's rights, promoting the rights of women to participate equally in our institutions and society, eliminating the barriers that they face, eliminating discrimination. In our unions, it's about increasing women's membership and increasing women's leadership within our unions. And this is all great, right? So in a rights-based society, we believe everyone should have equal rights. That's certainly something that we need to fight for. But at the heart of it, there's some, what we're looking at is primarily fighting for individual rights, individual solutions to really what is a collective problem. And so what I want to talk about today are some of the problems with this form of feminism, which we may call liberal feminism, and some of the potential pitfalls. So one of the problems with this form of feminism, of looking at individual rights and individual solutions, is at best what we're winning is the ability to compete in a game which we're probably going to lose, right? Capitalism is a system based on competition and exploitation. Most of us lose in that game. So when we fight to win, we get to compete in a game in which we're probably going to lose. This is not the ideal solution to our problems. We may win the right to enter a labor market, but we win no right to a job, no guarantee to a living wage. We may win the right to education, but it doesn't guarantee it's the kind of education or school that we want or need. Even in our unions, we're opening up unions for women's membership and leadership at a time when we all say our unions are dying and bureaucratic and dysfunctional. So to lead dying organizations. And it's not your unions. I'm just talking about that union. So under liberal feminism, we may be winning rights. At best, we're winning rights, but we're not necessarily winning power. We're not winning the power to change things or to change our world. We're winning access to the status quo. And at worst, liberal feminism may in fact entrench some of the worst tendencies of the system in which we live. So one of the things that neoliberals argue, or just free market capitalists argue, is that the best way to solve poverty, to solve the problems of capitalism, is to expand access to markets and expand markets. So let's bring women into the market as a way to solve poverty. Let's give women access to microcredit loans as a way to solve poverty. And in fact, we often use some of these arguments as a reason to justify war, right? So the US uses this as a basis for foreign policy. The poor women of the global south don't have access to education, so let's go to war and bomb their governments, right? So at worst, this is a system that entrenches the worst of individual rights. Liberal feminism entrenches the worst of our existing systems. Now, some women do well under liberal feminism. And in fact, in the United States, for example, white women with a college education have been the primary beneficiaries of affirmative action. They've done fairly well in the last 40 years in achieving the access to higher education, better jobs, higher wages. But as a result, that's actually increased the gap between white women and women of color, between women with a college education and women without college education. And in fact, so now we have more division within women as a group than we did 40 years ago. So it's detrimental to women as a group. And in fact, liberal feminism, in a sense, depends on cohesion of the class, cohesion of women, to build solutions, to build individual ladders for individual women to climb out. So we're passing policies that let individual women get up and escape, and the class is left behind, holding the ladder, weaker as a class, right? So these individual solutions may help certain individual people, but they don't help women as a group or women or the working class. A third problem with liberal feminism is it tends to focus primarily on women. And in fact, we know gender isn't just about women. Gender is not just about sexism. Gender doesn't only happen when sexism happens. There's a writer, Lynn Williams, who says gender happens every time adherence to gender roles trumps class solidarity. Because we know men live in a gendered system as well. And capitalism shapes our lives and our work in a way that makes us forced into very strict gender roles and gender identities. There's a lot of research about the ways in which notions of masculinity are harmful to men. We have cases of men who refuse to use safety equipment in their jobs, safety equipment often that our unions fought for, because they feel their masculinity is threatened. They're feeling vulnerable, they're feeling weakness, they're feeling no power on the job because in fact they have very little power. They may reject using safety equipment as a way to assert their masculinity, certainly harming themselves. And that tends to increase as women and people of color come into their jobs, such as in the building trades. So notions of gender can be harmful to men as well. I'm not saying it plays out differently, but it suggests that we can't understand feminism as something that's only affects women. It affects all of us. It affects men as well. So thinking about the ways in which we're forced into gender roles in our work and in our unions, and the ways in which that limits us as human beings. And then also suggesting that feminism as we understand it in the mainstream use is much too simplistic. It forces us into categories, and none of us are a category. In fact, all of us are multidimensional, complex human beings. The feminist theorist Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality to talk about the ways in which our different characteristics and identities intersect in different aspects of society, in the workplaces and in the home. We are not just a gender, we are not just a binary of male-female, we also have sexualities, ethnicities, religions, castes, classes. So we need to understand the ways in which all of us are marginalized by different systems of oppression. All of us may participate in systems of domination, but we're all much more complex than categories that liberal feminism may have us see ourselves. Because in fact, in a class-based society, when most people lose, in fact, when women are gaining access to the labor market, it does mean more competition over jobs. So to pit this as men versus women pits it as a competition which men might lose. And so we can understand the ways in which gender is used to divide us as a working class. So these are some of the problems with liberal feminism, and I'd say instead we want to use different definitions and concepts of feminism. And of course, one of the notions of a more radical feminism is none of this is individual, it's all collective. So I'm going to share some ideas that are not necessarily my ideas, but drawing on different feminist thinkers. But one is, of course, that we need a feminism that is intersectional, that understands us not just as male or female, but as multiple categories and multiple identities that intersect. We need a feminism that has a class analysis, that understands that capitalism is not the solution, it's part of the problem. It's not going to solve gender discrimination. In fact, it might enhance it. And we need a feminism that prioritizes collective solutions to collective problems, not individual solutions. So I'm going to put forward a few principles or guidelines that we might think about when we think about what a feminism might look to a global labor movement. So the first is that our feminism must be collective, bottom-up, and non-hierarchical. So in contrast to a notion of liberation led by vanguard parties, by charismatic leaders, by hierarchical institutions and organizations, we promote a bottom-up form of organizing. Now, this is not necessarily unique to feminism. You might say this sounds familiar. We've heard this before. You know, like other labor movements can promote a bottom-up notion, and that's true. But feminism has a lot to offer to this, in part because we also promote people as whole human beings, not just as workers. So an injury to one is an injury to all, for sure, but thinking of that as going beyond the workplace as well. Marta Harnecker, the Chilean activist and scholar, says, we need a feminism in which people are the protagonists, not the supporting actors. It's about people driving the agenda. So this also means a feminism that goes beyond the workplace, that understands the ways in which our communities and our homes, our personal lives are interconnected with our work lives. So I do a lot of work with low-wage work, retail workers in New York City. There's absolutely no way to understand retail workers' lives without their work lives without understanding their home lives and their community lives. The ways in which they are balancing care work, school work, taking care of sick parents, the ways in which people commute to work, the ways in which you set up your lives, it's interconnected with their work lives. Understanding scheduling challenges and wage challenges, you have to understand it as a comprehensive. And in my work as a labor educator, most of my students are union members. And you might think in the labor studies program, when you're talking about labor studies, that union members want to know about their constitution or grievances and this and that. That's important, yes. But most of the students want to study education, housing, police brutality, prisons. This is as integral to their work lives and their union lives as understanding their union constitution. So it means we're understanding our work as interconnected with our communities and our. It also means we're seeing care work as central to the work that we do as individuals, as humans. So we do our productive labor. We also have our reproductive labor that we do in the home. And again, not just women, but we do the care work, not just the cleaning, the cooking, the taking care of sick people, but the care work we do in our workplaces to look after coworkers, to help run our union meetings, to make sure that there's a facilitator in each small group, to self-organize. This is care work, and this is part of the work that we do in terms of our organizing. Now, some of you may be familiar with the notion of the personal, the political, one of the advances of feminist organizing. Some of you may get nervous about that because it has negative sides. When we say the personal is political, it also has at times meant people have focused entirely on your personal decisions, looked at what you do in the home, made judgments about how you live, and we get nervous. Some of us say, oh, I want to keep my personal. I don't want it to be political. I don't want it to be of everyone's, I want my union work just to be about my job. And that's understandable. We get nervous sharing too much of the personal. But also remember that in a class-based society, many of us don't have the privilege or the luxury to keep the personal out of the political. We don't have the choice. Not everyone has the choice to pass, quote unquote. We are forced into conforming to narrow gender roles, into narrow sexual identities, to race. We need to present, right? So if you're a retail worker, you need to present in a certain, appearance, right? You have to pass. So if you're so-called genderqueer, you have to pass as feminine or masculine. If you are gay, you have to pass as straight. And so remember, not everyone has that luxury. Some of us can choose to try and pass in certain situations. Not all of us can do that. Many people are forced to make the personal political because that's just where it is. And the fewer resources you have, the fewer options you have to pass. So we want to organize and create spaces where none of us need to make that choice, where we don't have to choose between passing or not passing, where we organize in a space that gives people the full range of their humanities, that you can share your full identity, your personal struggles in your union and in others in your work life. Capitalism is constantly arranging our lives in a way that alienates us from ourselves and from each other. It alienates us from our organizations and the collective. And this is the way we need to understand feminism. We want to challenge, we want to reorganize our lives in a way that doesn't force us to alienate ourselves. Now, we don't want to reduce our organizing, our politics to these personal struggles. We still have to fight power and we have to go to the heart of the machine. But we need to incorporate this notion that the political is personal into our organizing and take that on as our union work. That also relates to what is the end goal? What are we fighting for? If we're not just fighting to get into the status quo. Liberal feminism promotes liberalism, promotes capitalism, which is about economic growth. And we've already heard this week many of the challenges of that. Economic growth is not environmentally sustainable. It's also not humanly sustainable. It's not the goal that we want to fight for. I think we're fighting for human growth, for human development. What we are about is creating sustainable human lives. And that is different from a liberal feminist notion. It means collective care is central to the goal of what we're trying to build. So part of that is also saying this is not just about individual rights, but it's about collective responsibility. We have a responsibility to one another. We have a responsibility to the planet. So we're building a world that creates space that lets us care for each other and encourages and promotes care for one another. Okay. So in our organizing, we need to make that a priority, that we create space to care for one another and that we actually ask each other to step up and care for one another. In fact, unions are asking people to have each other's back. And that's what care work is to say, I'm supporting you, you support me. But also to have the courage to ask for that. Many of us as organizers tend to think we're out there solving people's problems, but care work also means letting people care for you. Accepting that care, accepting their leadership, and trusting them to have your back. So that mutual community and mutual reinforcing relationship. So building organizing is building community and building relationships, and this is the heart of democracy. It's the heart of self-organization and self-determination. So this is not, I'm not saying we should do this just because it's a thing to do, but I think that it's a necessary thing to do. And to say that democracy is not just the ends of what we're fighting for, but it's the means to get there. Democracy as deliberative, listening to one another, taking care of one another, taking each other's ideas seriously, being open to changing our minds, into every conversation with the notion that you may change your mind. And it means also a lot of listening. And one of the first things I learned when I started organizing is the 80-20 rule, that you listen 80% of the time and you talk 20% of the time. So this is also the heart of building relationships. Okay, so concretely, what does this mean? I would say in a lot of cases, it doesn't necessarily change the content of what we're fighting for. We still, the neoliberal policy is expanding women's access to education. But we're fighting for a different reason. I would say we're not fighting for education because we think it's going to lead to women getting access to a better job or moving up the career ladder. There's no guarantee education will solve poverty. Absolutely no guarantee, right? We fight for education because it's a human right and it's a good thing and we all want it, right? We all want access to it. We fight it for, so changing our, we're still fighting for education. We're just changing the direction. Living wage, I would say we still fight for higher wages because the right thing to do. It's a way to challenge conversations about who sets wages, how wages are determined, who has the right to say what human beings are worth. But there's a big trap there, because the living wage campaigns often divide us between the deserving poor and the non-deserving poor. In the United States, many cities have been passing living wage laws. At the same time, they're passing anti-homelessness legislation. We're further criminalizing poverty. As we say, some workers are worth it, are good people, and other people are bad. And so fighting might be a fine thing to do, but not in the context that reaffirms the labor market relationship. Rather in the concept that talks about living, not necessarily about the wage, but about the living. What is the kind of world we want to live in? Okay, and so in some cases it won't necessarily change the focus of the demands of what we do, but it should change the focus. It should say that we're not fighting for the status quo. We fight within the status quo, we fight to break down barriers in the status quo, but really we're looking for another longer-term vision. We're looking for another world that we want to live in. We don't want, some people say our dreams won't fit in your ballot boxes. We want to say our dreams won't fit in your labor market. So I would say that, a liberal feminist feminism has some, there are some elements in there that we can support. We say that we should not be discrimination, there should not be barriers, but we do not want to have that limit what we're fighting for. We need an intersectional, inclusionary, bottom-up form of radical feminism. We need to have our feminism be about dreaming for a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like Derek Keenan to do a presentation on syndicalism.
Oh,
can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
I'm blocking. Yeah, I'm going to move because I'm blocking.
Okay, 2 years ago I was invited by GLI to come and speak on syndicalism, and a year ago I was asked to come and speak on socialism, and this year I'm going to kind of speak mainly on syndicalism, and I'm going to speak about how syndicalism and socialism interrelate and so forth, and I'm also going to try and work in some feminism a little bit, or at least how it relates to syndicalism, and I'm going to try and do that in 20 minutes. I may fail, right? I may fail, but I'll give it a go. Syndicalism. What I'm going to attempt to do is to define it, to provide a very brief history of it, and bring that up to date. I'm going to try and relate it to the idea of socialism, as I say, and I'm going to have a look at feminism and its relation to syndicalism. It's not a case of socialism or syndicalism or feminism. It's about all three, or it's not happening. Yeah, I think, anyway. So, to start with syndicalism. Syndicalism probably constitutes one of the least understood currents in the workers' movement. For many people, it's perhaps a ghost from the past. Sometimes it's a political insult that's thrown at people. But for most people, most trade unionists, I think, it's still pretty much an unknown quantity. Now, for the speakers of Romance languages, patently syndicalism just means unionism, trade unionism. So what we're really talking about when we talk about syndicalism in this context is revolutionary syndicalism and sometimes anarcho-syndicalism. It's a specific current that emerged towards the end of the 19th century and flourished particularly in the first 20 years of the 20th century. That has been since that period greatly a marginal force within the labour and trade union movement. Okay, so a little bit about definition. Right, so we can talk about syndicalism as a historical phenomenon and then as a contemporary organising model. This is going to be very, very broad brush because of the amount of time that I've got to talk about it. Okay, so the defining characteristics of syndicalism I would suggest is the idea of the centrality of class conflict, of the inevitability of class conflict in a capitalist society, right? And therefore, in a sense, the embracing of that class conflict. Yeah, it's the antithesis, if you like, of what in modern parlance would be the notion of partnership. It's the idea that partnership is an illusion. and also a deadly error for the labour movement to make. Ultimately a recipe for disaster. The slogan of the First International, the emancipation of the working class is the task of the working class alone. Right, so the idea of political independence for the working class, independence from the tutelage of political parties, and saviours from on high, yeah, of the liberators of the working class that might come from without the working class, as it were. So the idea that the freedom of the workers was something that is taken, not asked for, and that liberation does not come from above, it comes from us, from below. It follows from that direct action, therefore, is the key tool. Right? So direct action rather than mediated action through parliamentary activity and so forth. One of the what follows from this is a distrust and generally speaking, a kind of opposition to statism. Right? The very fundamental belief that the state is not our friend. The state is not a neutral arbiter. It's their state. Yeah, it's the state of the ruling class. And that you have to bear that in mind when working with it. You want things from the state. Yeah? But how do you go about that? Do you enter the state? What's your relationship with? And syndicalists tend to think that the relationship with the state is one of, generally speaking, antagonism. Now, one of the reasons historically why syndicalism tended to be very critical of parliamentarism is because syndicalist unions tended to organise everybody. They did not only organise the labour elites and skilled workers and so forth, so they organised a lot of people who didn't have any in the system in that way. So parliamentarism was fairly meaningless to them. But also because syndicalism came out of the ideas of both Marxism and anarchism, which were both very critical of the notion of parliamentarism, elements of that at least. The autonomy of action by workers. So the idea that workers in workplaces or in communities should have autonomy of action, right? And that the decisions made by workers should be the decisions that carry them forward. That it's not the decisions made at the top of unions or at the top of organisations that make the difference in workers' struggles. So therefore, a very strong commitment to democratic process, yeah, of making sure that unions are fundamentally democratic. And very specifically about syndicalism, what kind of distinguishes it very strongly is the notion that the union is the vehicle of revolutionary transformation. So it's workers organised in unions is where the politics get done. Yeah? It's workers organised in unions that can make the transformation in society. That's social or socialist transformation. Okay, so quite often syndicalists have been attacked as people who believe in just mere militancy, right? Just in kind of a brute force approach to unionism, or that they're economistic, or sometimes they're accused of being apolitical. And if anybody actually looks at the history of the syndicalist movement, it's actually the opposite is the truth. Yeah, that syndicalism encouraged a profound emphasis on worker self-organisation and worker self-education, yeah, and the idea of a highly politicised workforce. But the syndicalists had continue to have a very strong vision of the future, which is vital, and that is the idea of worker and community generalised self-management of the workplace and society. That things like nationalisation and so forth aren't enough. That the workers themselves have to control the means of production and distribution. It has to be in our hands. That there needs to be directly democratic structures of administration. Ultimately, the syndicalist vision of socialism was one in which there was the abolition of wage labour, and it was a slogan, the abolition of the wages system, that was very, very central to the syndicalist. The the idea that when the working class control of the means of production and distribution, and work is democratised, and we work in a solidaric way, organised for human need as opposed to profit, then the wages system would be superfluous. So the syndicalist vision was a very broad vision, a very big vision, that was based on the belief that the workers already run things. We just need to take over and run them for ourselves as opposed to the ruling class. We can take over and create a new world. So that's very far from being simply about militancy or simply about brute force. Okay. So that means that the socialism, if you like, of syndicalism is three things essentially. It's democratic, it's libertarian, and it's revolutionary. It's democratic not in the sense of the parliamentary democracy or representative democracy, but more in terms of directly democratic. Socialism should be based upon the democratisation of every aspect of human life, of human existence, starting with the most undemocratic part of any society, the workplace. Workplaces are essentially and remain for the most part dictatorships. This democratisation was described by the anarchist Keenan as the means by which to integrate individuals into structures which they can understand and therefore control. Libertarian, because I believe that's intimately related to the notion of democracy. Socialism cannot be something that is imposed from the top down, and that's very much a syndicalist kind of perspective. At the centre is a notion of a world without order givers and order takers. And therefore it should be, our movement, our union movement should be as much as possible prefigurative as we mean to go on. Yeah? If we want to have a society without the division into order givers and order takers, then that's how we should be organising. And revolutionary, the union movement should be revolutionary, and our socialism revolutionary essentially, because ultimately it requires a rupture with existing systems, the system of capitalism, but also revolutionary because it entails a revolutionary transformation of all social relationships, not merely the economic. Okay, so they have wonderful ideas and everybody's got kind of a warm glow or whatever it might be, possibly. I'd like to think so. I'm certainly glowing. I don't know if it's about the warmth of the ideas, maybe it's just a bit hot up here. But what did this mean in real terms? Well, there was a golden age of syndicalism, broadly speaking, and that, as I say, was at the end of the 19th century and for the first 20 or so years of the 20th century. And very key to that was this union in the middle, which still exists today, although it's no longer syndicalist, is the CGT, I would say CGT, in France, which was almost like the progenitor, I won't use that word, the beginning organisation of syndicalism. It's where almost syndicalism got its name from, revolutionary unionism. The famous one big unions, anybody here ever heard of the Wobblies, or the Industrial Workers of the World? Yeah? Okay, well most people in the Labour movement have an idea about Joe Hill and stuff like that. So the one big union idea of the IWW. In Latin America, the regional federation, the Workers' Regional Federation of the Argentine. Down below, the Free Workers' Union of Germany and the Syndicalist Union of Italy. And these organisations were mass organisations of the working class. Outside the one big union, the IWW probably organised about 100,000 members, although apparently it issued about 1 million red cards, so it's a high turnover. But certainly organising on a world scale millions of workers. And it constituted an opposition to European-style social democracy and the dominant union models, which even then were becoming very, very bureaucratic and very, very integrated into the capitalist system. Syndicalism was international and internationalist from the very beginning, and the first international conference was 1913. Syndicalism at the time, in the period of the 1910s, at the golden age, was the term syndicalism was like the terms a little bit later Bolshevism, or the term terrorism is something to scare people with to some extent, but it was a household word, as it were. How long have I got? Whoa, 10 minutes. Right, syndicalism versus feminism. Just a little bit of a side, because I did say I'd talk about the aspects of feminism. Oppositional masculinism. There have been critiques in some ways of syndicalism as being a very sort of macho kind of, I'm sort of pumping my muscles here a little bit, what exists, a very macho kind of perspective, a very macho way of approaching politics and so forth. And if you look at the actual imagery here, it's kind of these guys stripped to the waist, rippling muscles and so forth. And it would suggest in some ways that women were invisible within the syndicalist movement. I think just as within the broader socialist movement, there has been an element of women being kind of marginalised within the syndicalist movement historically, which is really, really far from the truth in terms of the actual membership of syndicalist unions. In this wonderful publication by WeGo, the only school we have, it makes reference to syndicalist women organising in Bolivia in the 1920s, 30s and 40s in something called the Federation of Women Workers, which was part of a larger anarcho-syndicalist union called the Local Federation of Labour. And they organised amongst the very workers that we've been talking about this week, which is amongst the informal economy, from precarious workers and so forth. And they won big time. These are the folks up in the corner. There's a photograph of them. They won amazing things during the period that they were active, which is roughly from the 27 to the mid-50s. And they did that greatly through direct action, through demonstrations and so forth, where more traditional ways of organising weren't open to them. Their sort of bigger organisation, the FOL, it organised both industrial workers and informal and precarious workers, including criminals. They famously organised bootleggers and smugglers and so forth. I would have liked to see how that worked out. But if you can organise them, I say to you, you can organise pretty much anybody. Okay, so very briefly, syndicalism was taken up by elements of the feminist movement, the famous Emma Goldman, American feminist icon. I haven't got time to look at that too long. Syndicalist feminist women in Germany, in the Syndicalist Women's League, set up unions for homemakers and for domestic workers and so forth. And that was quite controversial at the time. And I think there's a lot of stuff we could say about that if we had the time. Commonalities between syndicalism and feminism. The struggle for the consistency of means and ends. Yeah, absolutely. And if I just get my notes here I've been told I've got an extra 5 minutes, so I'll just slow down. Everything's going to be okay. Yeah, okay. Right, so again, going back to this idea of how you organise now is how you want to see the future, as it were. That's been very central to radical feminism. A critique of hierarchy. Syndicalists were historically very dubious about the notions of ossified leadership, leadership that was separated from the rank and file and so forth. And feminists have been very central to the development of critiques of hierarchical social relationships. The valuing of spontaneity and autonomy is there in feminism at its best, I think, and it's there in syndicalism at its best as well, whilst never losing view of the necessity for organisation, practical, dynamic organisation. Spot the woman here. She's down there. Hopefully they weren't asking us to take the minutes or make the tea. This is the founding Congress of the International Workers Association in 1923. Just have to move over that just a little bit, but it still exists. The International Workers Association, originally the International Working Men's Association, still exists, and we'll talk about that very, very briefly later. Okay, so what happened to this syndicalism? Why aren't we all syndicalists, and why aren't the absolutely enormous sort of syndicalist unions anymore. Well, there are a few. First World War saw the collapse of the entire international socialist movement. The majority of syndicalist unions did not support the war, but the big one did. The CGT famously supported the war. Yeah, had a massive impact on politics generally. Bear in mind that at this stage, syndicalism was a vital and important part of the labour movement. State repression. Organisations such as the IWW were banned in Canada, were banned in Australia, were faced with vigilante and state repression across the board. The Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution, in many ways, took the steam out of, in many ways, the syndicalist movement. Here was a brand new way of organising. They didn't require unions. It just required this vanguard party to take control, to take power, as it were. And the revolution, that inspirational revolutionary wave slowly came to an end. Fascism cleared up. Yeah, when fascism took power, it took power in countries where syndicalism was enormous. Places like Portugal, Italy, to some extent Germany, Japan, and then finally in Spain in 1939 after the Spanish Civil War and Revolution, in which syndicalists were very central. And then the post-45 class peace, this kind of settlement, as it were, where suddenly syndicalism, or maybe not so suddenly, syndicalism seemed like an anachronism. Yeah, we were all like benefiting from the brief period of relative health that capitalism had, was going through. And syndicalism at that time was maintained by a very small number of flame carriers of the sacred flame. Not torch bearers. Okay, syndicalism re-emerged. It re-emerged in small ways straight after the Second World War, but in a bigger way during the beginnings of the capitalist crisis in the 1970s and the re-emergence of the International Workers' Association. Now, Dave, back on the first, Dave Spooner, talked about the various union internationals, the ITUC, the WFTU. There are two other internationals, the World Organisation of Workers, which is a dreadful right-wing organisation, and the International Workers Association, which brings together the revolutionary and anarcho-syndicalist unions. But we can certainly talk about an eclipse and a re-emergence of the syndicalist movement. And these, is this the point now? Oh yeah, right. So these are the kind of unions that are involved in the International Workers Association today. In Brazil, Brazilian Workers Confederation, Italian Syndicalist Union, the old CNT, the famous CNT from the Spanish Civil War in Spain. Here in the UK, something called the Solidarity Federation. And that organisation kind of constitutes the kind of, if you like, orthodoxy of modern syndicalism, as it were. In Europe, there's something called the Red and Black Coordination, which involves some of the larger syndicalist unions that aren't part of the IWA, such as the Spanish CGT, the Swedish SAC, the Swedish Workers' Central, the Workers' Initiative Union in Poland. And that's a much looser kind of coordination, as it were. It couldn't be described as an international. And finally, there's the European Network of Alternative Unionism, which brings in a lot of unions that are perhaps semi-syndicalist, sympathetic to syndicalism, along with traditional kind of syndicalist unions. So, for example, the Libertarian Workers' Union of Greece, the SUD in France, and organisations even like our own RMT have been involved in this, particularly around rail workers' coordinations and so forth. So here we are in 21st century syndicalism. How long have I got? Another 5 minutes. I can't stretch it out now, I don't know what to say. No, 21st century syndicalism. Well, the slogan of the IWW, and I think it's in some ways a quite controversial slogan, is organising the unorganised, the abandoned, the betrayed. Right, so basically, syndicalism, to some extent, to a great extent, lost its footing amongst traditional industrial working class, in the 1930s and so forth. So today, syndicalists mainly, not entirely, but mainly organise amongst precarious workers, informal workers, workers on workfare and similar schemes, amongst the unemployed and so forth. Right, so the areas where there's actually, obviously we all know, an enormous growing potential for unionisation. 21st century syndicalism promotes the idea, to a great extent, of this notion of solidarity unionism. So we do unionism. Unions aren't something out there; they're in here, right? We are the union. You'll often hear sort of like people in our trade unions saying things like, "You are the union," right? Well, most people don't feel like they are the union, to be honest. Most people in unions aren't really in unions in any meaningful sense. They don't feel that. And solidarity unionism is a kind of notion of understanding unions as associational bodies, right, as a coming together, as that literal sense of union, rather than representative bodies or, you know, the organisations in shiny offices and all the rest of it around the world. Yeah, and that really stems from the idea of organising the people at the really sharp end, as it were. Horizontal organisations, so as much as possible doing away with bureaucratic kind of layers and so forth in unions. Intersectional, going back to the last speaker about intersectionality and the way that struggles intersect and they can make it stronger in that way. And going right back to that old idea right from the beginning of direct action, yeah, of taking direct action. Yeah. Here are some actual living syndicalists involved in some syndicalist activity. It gives me a chance to point this in their eyes. This one here is actually, what is it? It's the Union of Syndicalists in Poland, and they are supporting a small syndicalist union in Australia called the General Transport Workers Association. A day of action, I think. This is the Mall of Shame campaign that's been going on, carried out with migrant workers by the Free Workers Union in Germany. This is the IWW's recent organising efforts amongst rail workers in the United States. And these are really quite recent. This is recent demonstrations by the Greek IWW, the Greek Industrial Workers of the World, on a demonstration in Athens, I believe. And finally, just here, this is an IWA school in Hong Kong, I think, that was held last autumn, as it were. That's syndicalism. Direct action gets the goods. That's the general kind of ethos, and I thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks, Derek. I'd like to invite Stephanie back up, and thank you all again, Derek, Bishnu, Stephanie, for your fascinating definitions of socialism, liberal feminism, and Derek for covering everything. So I'm going to open up to questions. So please, if you are going to ask a question, raise your hand, state your union and your name, and also if you're directing it at a particular speaker. So, hands. Okay, so we'll start with the back.
I'm Shana from Pakistan. Thank you, Stephanie, for this very comprehensive presentation about feminism. You raised the issue of care work, and here I would like to flag the issue of unpaid work in which women are involved. Care work is most of the time is not paying women. And there are a lot of women who are involved in work like domestic work and work in agriculture sector and family business. And most of the time we'll talk about like organizing informal sector workers, home-based women workers, domestic workers, but there is not enough debate and enough discussion and enough thoughts about the unpaid work of women. So I want to ask you how you put this issue in overall feminist perspective. Actually, I want to listen a little more about this issue of unpaid work of women from you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take a few more questions and then invite the speakers to answer. Yes?
Good morning. I want to share one point first, and then I will go for the questions. I'm Ramesh from GEFONT, General Federation of Nepalese Students. My General Secretary already explained about the socialism, but I want to add one point. So that is what the policy we adopt to eliminate the inequality in our country. Basically, what is the policy we are taking? So that is the class plus 3. That is our main objective. Class that denotes all types of the working class. That they are facing the different type of the inequality within the country. So that should be addressed first. But we should not neglect in the same times plus 3 other agenda. That is number 1 is the gender issue. That should be addressed. And second, the religion. So just like in Nepal, not religion, region-wise. In Nepal, there is the 3 geographical region: Himalayas, hill, and plain. And there is some kinds of the conflict. So we need to address the region-wise discriminations in the same time. And third one is the caste-based issues. In Nepal, we have the untouchability and the caste-based discriminations also. So we need to address these 3 things. So that's why we decided that class plus 3 agenda should be the trade union agenda in Nepal. But I want to add one questions also. Whether the gender issue, if we try to address the gender issue along with the class, along with the another types of this inequality, whether we also talk as a feminist or not. So that is my question.
Okay. If we're thought of as a feminist?
So we, as a policy,
yeah,
as a GEFONT, we said we need to eliminate all kinds of the discrimination, including the gender-based discriminations. So, under this policy, can we talk as a feminist? That is the question.
Thank you. It was very interesting. 2 points. One to Derek. The Swedish syndicalism, they are just street fights today. The organization is kidnapped by anarchists, so you can forget it. They don't exist in the working place. It's just street fights today, unfortunately. Street fighters? Yeah, the only street fighters today. Fighting with the Nazis and so on, and always looking for a fight. They are not a union, really. About feminism, it was very interesting to hear your when you talk about feminism. I have one question for you. Why do you think that the liberal version of feminism have become so strong in countries like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, where we have strong unions? We have liberal feminism, not the liberals. The feminists you are talking about, that has class roots, class view. Do you have any idea how that have become? That's all. Thank you.
Khalid?
Khalid from Pakistan. My question is to Bishnu. When you talk about socialism as a goal in Nepal for the GEFONT, do you have any strategy to work together with the other regional unions to achieve this goal? Because I think in our region and in other regions as well, I think socialism cannot be achieved only in one country. And the unions especially need solidarity, and unions need to work together to change the economic and social system, and for that we need very close cooperation. In our region, there are many difficulties, and the people are not able to meet each other easily. So what is GEFONT's view on this, and how, if you have any strategy, please, if you can explain.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then Bert.
Yeah, Bert Scoundberg, GMP. A question for Derek, really. Derek, do you think there's any any room for more collaboration between syndicalist unions and non-syndicalist unions? Because listening to it, it strikes me that a lot of our trade unions have syndicalist ideas, but they don't express them as such, because so many of us are in favour of public ownership, or ownership indeed of the means of production and distribution as well. In fact, a lot of our unions' constitutions actually will say that. So I just wonder, is there room for more collaboration between these two branches of trade unionism?
Thanks. Okay, so I'll like to invite Stephanie to start, and then Bishnu, and then Zarek.
Okay, I suppose I should stand so it's easier here. I forgot to mention too, I brought this book that I wrote. It's not so much specific about feminism, but about my work doing global work around low-wage work with groups around the world. So yeah, the question of care work, it's this crazy puzzle, which is like you could have two women both at home taking care of their families and their homes. It's not considered work until they actually swap homes and take care of each other's family for a wage, and then it's considered work, right? So, but in reality, it's not them swapping homes. What we have globally is some women being pulled into the labor market, usually white women, women in the West, women with college education, policies to promote them entering the paid labor force in a certain way, and then a global supply chain of care work where women are being exported and imported around the world to care for other women's children. And so this is a complex system in which it really isn't a solution to anyone's challenges. And in a way, what it does is those women entering the global supply care chain are actually releasing pressure on systems like the United States, where we really should be in absolute revolution because our work-family balance does not work. It's not sustainable. This model of people working 40, 50, 60 hours of work and having women from the global south take care of our care work, it's not sustainable for anyone in that story. The question is, what is the solution? Do we want to champion this because now we have two women earning a wage and earning some independence and entering the labor market? Do we want to return to women are staying home and taking care of their own families and not entering the labor market? I'm not sure that there's one size that's the answer to everyone. I think the answer is, again, going back to self-organization and self-determination, where women have more accesses to resources to make that decision for themselves and their communities. Maybe things like the basic income might be a way to solve that. I know that's controversial in some parts of Europe, but there's no way to solve this without a global redistribution of resources and power. Certain women in this equation get to make more decisions than others, but most are being faced with a lose-lose choice. We're being faced with the choice of work all the time and never take care of your family, or just do care work on the side, or to do care work for pay for other people's families. And it's a lose-lose scenario. So I think that the liberal version of feminism, and in part, may be popular in parts of Europe where social democracy has had success, because if you do think markets can be managed, if we can, in fact, work with capitalism, then it makes sense to try and integrate into that system. But the question is social democracy sustainable? Is it actually lasting without an actual class struggle? And I think the answer is no. But in fact, liberal feminism privileges certain women with resources and the women who can win in that system. So certain women are winning within a liberal feminist perspective, and I think that's why it's more dominant. To have a more intersectional, radical vision of feminism is to incorporate the visions of more marginalized people, not just more marginalized women, but also more marginalized men as well, people marginalized in general by society. And I think it's threatening and scary to think about a form of feminism that's actually challenging the entire system, that's saying let's rethink all of our institutions and the way our societies function. And yes, certainly I think feminism, fighting discrimination is absolutely important. Fighting for rights is fundamental. It's just sometimes our feminism is so much about what we're against. It's not enough about a vision of what we're for. It's not enough about dreaming for another world. So I think, yes, we have to fight discrimination. We have to say what's wrong with the current system, but we also have to say what the other world that we want to be fighting for.
Thank you, brother. Yes, the issue of socialism, it is not not our own issue, it is the common issue of the Nepalese trade union. So to address and to raise the voice, we have make one platform called JTUCC, Joint Trade Union Coordination Center in Nepal, and we are together raising our voice towards the socialism. And in the region there is a SATUC. This is called SATUC. It is the affiliates of the ITUC. Through that SATUC, we are initiating to raise our voice in that region, and it needs to come together from the south region, from the trade union. So but it is very difficult in the south region, South Asia. The trade unions are not closer. It is our challenge. In the future, through this SATUC, we will try to organize them, and we will try to go together. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there should. There should be collaboration between syndicalist unions and non-syndicalist unions, and there should be a cross-fertilisation of ideas. I think a lot of young people are really attracted to the idea of these autonomous syndicalist, small, highly democratic organisations, because they think trade unions are big bureaucratic monsters and so forth, right? So they're getting involved in syndicalist unions in a way that maybe they might not be getting involved in the big unions. But a lot of people are then joining big unions. The big unions recruit people from a syndicalist background, and there is that kind of that they're bringing those kind of syndicalist type ideas into the mainstream, as it were. The big challenge is to mainstream syndicalist ideas. And what I wouldn't like to see is a kind of a false kind of dichotomy between syndicalism and the mainstream movement. The mainstream trade union movement has roots in syndicalism, or syndicalism has roots in it. If you look at the RMT, RMT, big.
They've gone.
Oh,
There's a strike on.
Yeah. I was going on strike. Inconvenience in the public. The RMT's route, no RMT without syndicalism. The National Union of Railwaymen was essentially a syndicalist initiative. The precursor of the Unite Union, the Amalgamated Society of Engineers, and one of the precursors of it, was involved in the founding of the IWW. There's all these kind of links, as it were, so I think it would be wrong. I don't think we should kind of be fighting against each other in that sense. I think maybe in some countries where there's been a long-standing syndicalist tradition, maybe like in Sweden, and there are big mainstream unions, I think there's more of a tension. You might have heard a little bit of that just there. I think if the anti-fascist street fighters, there are 8,000 of them, I think. So that's a pretty good team of anti-fascist street fighters to have, even if they weren't organised as a union. But I think they are a bit. But what I'd say is, I think there's it's really important that we don't kind of clash, essentially. If you think about what's going on down in London in the hotel workers, and there could be someone that could speak to this at some stage, but there's the IWW, there's the IWGB, which is kind of syndicalist, there's the United the World Union, and there's Unite, right? And I think they all have a good relationship. They support each other. They don't try and poach each other's members, and there's a good dynamic going on there. And long may that kind of cooperation exist. So, yeah, I think there's lots that can be done.
So I'm going to take a final 3 questions and then move on into coffee and discussion groups.
Something about feminism and also socialism and also syndicalism.
That's the 3 questions.
I'm not expecting answers, maybe later I can discuss, but I want to raise this. Actually, syndicalism is very new to me, right? Especially in our area, I don't think. But still, I'm thinking about, you were talking about challenging hierarchy system. But all the traditional trade unions also got a hierarchy structure. So I want to make some more information and clarification that later we can have. But again, the feminism, liberal feminism, is not very much in our area talking about, because we always talk about radical feminism, because we think that's very close to class struggle, right? So I want to just ask you about in other Western area, what about this critical feminism 16? Very live, or are they connecting with the classes? That's one question. And for the Nepal, actually the constitution, the new constitution, maybe you are aware about what are the things inside. And I'm aware a lot of women were involved and a lot of things are left. Mind is there to the draft process. So can you see any different, this constitution and the other constitutions, the other country constitutions, any different towards socialism or whatever? Can you see any differences and can you highlight? Thank you.
Last two questions. One. Any more else? Okay, we'll go with that one, thanks.
I've just got a question for Stephanie, really. I really liked what you were saying about the personal is political. I really believe that's very central to the way we organise. I really believe that if you don't practice what you preach, then really your message is lost a lot of the time. However, I can't help also noticing that I'm talking obviously for England here, but I've noticed that we've seen the growth of kind of a lot of identity type politics. I was a Labour councillor in the 1980s in England and was one of the first women's committee in the country. And I remember the Tories having a box of white mice and letting them off in the chamber when it was set up, and it was to be kind of loony left at that time, that type of politics, and all those ideas about the need for women's rights to be taken seriously and acted upon, they then became mainstream. They became liberal feminism, as you very well described. One of the other women who was on the same committee as myself was a woman called Tessa Jowell, who went on to become a minister in the Labour government. And in her role as part of a number of women who got into Parliament, very much supported the status quo and still continue to do so. And there is this discussion all the time about, well, it's vital, if we get women into positions in Parliament, it's really crucial, and I support that. I want to see women's faces in government just as I want to see men's. But the argument is that that's about just your identity that matters and not the status quo. And what I'm trying to say is, I suppose, has identity politics, I'm a woman, therefore listen to me what I'm saying, it doesn't matter if I'm talking rubbish or whatever. Does that undermine the person as political? That's what I'm trying to say, because I really believe strongly in the person as political, and yet I'm in despair sometimes at the number, and it doesn't apply to women only. You get working class people standing up, and my class's background, and then they go and sell out all the workers, So it happens in many areas, not obviously just women, obviously. So that's all I'm trying to say, really. I'm just thinking on my feet, so sorry if it doesn't make any sense. Okay, thank you.
Any final questions for the speakers? One last one at the back.
A question for Derek. I'm wondering about you presented a different international cooperation between different syndicalists, and I'm wondering about this Luce network that was not part of the international confederation. Are there any particular clear reasons why they are not? I mean, are there ideological differences or less interest in international cooperation, or what's the reason why they are not choosing not to be part of it?
Okay.
Yep.
So can I bring? Are you ready?
Oh, sure.
Can I bring Stephanie and then Bishnu and then Derek?
Okay. So I think the liberal feminists. I think a lot of political organizations, women's organizations, are more radical or revolutionary feminist. I think the liberal feminism view is primarily in the UN, the world of the UN and the millennial goals, and funders, foundations, NGOs. They're promoting this liberal feminism perspective because it kind of is more clear, works with their ideology. So there's lots of good examples of women's organizations that are operating in a more radical way, and maybe yours might be too. My colleague Johanna Brenner has written about some of them, like the Coalition for Justice in the Maquiladoras, and different women's organizations that have a very more intersectional radical feminist perspective. But I think the danger is in the institutions that are promoting liberal feminist policies as a way to expand markets. I think the identity politics question is a tough one. I think partly because it's often posed as oppositional, that we either have to do class politics or identity politics, and I think we have examples in which both can be complementary. Certainly looking at the 1960s, there was a lot of identity-based movements, Black Power movements, Chicano movements, women's movements, that were also class movements. I think the problem becomes when identity politics is not intersectional, when it's framed as what we say the oppression Olympics. My oppression is greater than yours, and my oppression trumps yours. That silences others, and it is not an intersection. So I think that I believe incorporating identity matters because we all have identity, and our identities are matter to us. It's just that they are not the category isn't the end itself. It's a way to have a conversation and process the dialogue, and I think identity as intersectional makes it less that way, that it's about trumping another person's politics or identity. So, yeah.
Yes, my answer to the sister from Sri Lanka. Yes, there are any differences towards to the socialism than other countries. This is your question. Yes, I already mentioned there is a debate is going on, and what system should be established. But just some times ago, the major political party, they agreed to all big political party. They agreed socialism will be the goal. They are ready to include that sentence put in the new constitution. And in that big political party, there are varieties. There are Congress party, they favors liberalism, and there is one Communist party, they favor socialism, and there is Maoist, and they extremists, and they favor socialism, but very hard. They are very hard communists. They also agreed to put that word. And another is a regional party. They just talk about region. They don't talk about whole nation. They all agreed they will put as a goal to the socialism. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I don't feel entirely qualified to answer it. I'm not a member of a union that's affiliated with the International Workers Association. There are divisions within the international syndicalist movement, and they are sometimes sort of ideological and so forth. But I think it'd be fair to say that some of those divisions are fairly minimal. You know, they're not like the disagreements that political organisations have with each other. You know, whether it's the minutiae that they kind of disagree with, and you know, various left organisations tend to hate each other more than they actually hate capitalism. I don't think there's that element. You get people that are kind of sectarian everywhere, don't you? I mean, people that have this kind of narrow-minded sort of approach to whatever they're doing. You know, our way is the way, and everybody else is just wrong. Like, it's really badly wrong. And I think there's an element of that in syndicalism, as there is in anything else, but it's not a major one. And I think there are sort of moves to sort of bring people together, and there's certainly solidarity, I think, between all the sort of syndicalist family, as it were. And you know, in that sense, it's quite healthy, as it were. But I couldn't really go into the minutiae, and anyway, it'd be really tedious if I could, I suspect. So yeah, it's about solidarity.
Thank you very much. Can we show our appreciation again once for the speakers? Okay, so I believe now we're going to have discussion groups slightly earlier than planned so that we can get back.